Okay, Boker Tov. Today's daf is Lamed Hey. We pick up in the middle of Lamed Dal and Lamed Bet, and we are dealing with the debate in the Mishnah between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, how to read the psukim in the Torah that says you split the live animal and the dead animal, where Rabbi Meir reads it that the dead animal is worth nothing. It doesn't really mean you split the dead animal. It really means you split the depreciation due to death. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you split the live and the dead one. Now, this only works out if the animals were of equal value, as the Gemara has begun illustrating. And the Gemara says that the point of Rabbi Yehuda that the mazik is a part owner in the carcass. You would think it means that he could also suffer the loss if the value of the carcass goes down, but that would make Tam more severe than other types of than muad and other types of nezek, because other types of nezek, it's the nizak that fully owns the carcass. So why here should the mazik be a part owner and suffer in the loss? So it actually winds up that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the mazik is a part owner only for the purpose of if the value of the carcass goes up, then he benefits in the appreciation of the value. So that's the debate of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda reads the pasuk more literally and has the mazik as a part owner in the carcass, at least for purposes of appreciation. But now the Gemara continues on the top of Lamed Dal and Lamed Bet, and the Gemara says like this. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Line starts with Yochanan about 12 lines down. Something like 12 lines down. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So says Rabbi Yochanan, Shvach nevela ikebenayu. The difference of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is if the carcass increases in value. Certainly, if it decreases in value, the nizak suffers that. That would be true in the case of a muad, so it's certainly true in the case of a tam. But if the carcass increases in value, then the mazik as a part owner, that at least he gains in some of that increase in value. Shvach nevela ikebenayu. Tamar savar denizak have. One holds even that's of the nizak, like in other cases. That would be Rabbi Meir. Umar savar Rabbi Yehuda that if half of the appreciation goes to the mazik, and that's the fulfillment of the verse that they split the carcass. That's what was bothering Rabbi Yehuda in the following Breita. Since Rabbi Yehuda has the reality that the case of Tam, not only do you pay half, but you even get this extra benefit, the mazik, that you gain in the appreciation of the carcass. So he raised the following logical problem. Now that you say that the Torah actually has compassion on the mazik, goes easy on him, lets him gain in the appreciation of the carcass, that he takes some of the appreciation of the carcass. So if that's true, let's imagine the following case. Let's say an ox worth 20, Gordon ox worth 100. Now, the case of the Torah, right, or the only way in which the Torah's case makes sense, that it's fair, is assuming that the animals are worth the same amount. So when you split the live one and you split the carcass of the dead one, you wind up paying for half the damages. But let's say the actual values were different. Let's say it's a case of let's say the goring ox was 20 and the gored ox was 100. Okay, you'll make big horns here. It's the one that's gory. Okay. And now this goes down to 50. Okay. So the actual damage was 50. You should pay half, 25, which basically means the whole ox should go over to the nisa. Okay. But let's say you do the pasuk as it's literally written. If you do the pasuk like it's written, so they split this. They split the live one. Each one takes $10 from the live one. And they split the dead one. Each one takes $25 from the dead one. So the mazik walks away with $35, half of his live one and half of the guy's dead one. He walks away with $35. His ox to begin with was only $20. He gains from it, right? So this is why the Torah has to be talking that the oxen are worth the same. Because if this ox is worth a lot more, then the nizak will gain more than the damage done. If this ox is worth a lot more, then the mazik will walk away with a profit. Okay? So, Heichan Matzinu Mazik Niskar. But how could that be? How could the mazik walk away with a profit? Shazen Niskar, that this one should walk away with a profit. When did we ever find such a thing? The verse says, Shalem Yishalem. Pay. Baili Mishalmin. The owner of the goring ox pays. They ain't by the nodlim. The owner of the goring ox doesn't walk away with a profit, doesn't take something. So he's the one that pays out of pocket. Okay, my omer. Now, why did you now? So, and the point is that what underscores the bizarre now, because the havamina. I mean, the Gemara say, what's the havamina? Well, since we find, says Rabbi Yehuda, that the mazik actually does get part ownership of the carcass and does get the increased value of the carcass, that the Torah is going easy on the mazik. If the Torah is going easy on the mazik, maybe it'll allow the mazik to even walk away with a profit in a scenario like this. No, that's too absurd. It's one thing to say that he gains from the appreciation of the carcass. It's another thing to say that the Torah will let him walk away with an actual profit out of the whole thing. Okay, now, my Omer, why did you need to say a second pasuk? Meaning, why isn't it just enough to say that it's illogical that the mazik should get a profit? Why do you have to quote a pasuk that says the mazik pays and the mazik doesn't take? My Omer, that's true in this case, that it clearly would be unfair that the mazik would walk away with a profit and the nizak would be obviously out money. Right, he'd be left with $35 from an ox that was worth $100, and he'd be walking away with the profit. That you don't need a pasuk to tell you don't do that. That's clearly unfair. Let's say there would not be a loss to the nizak. What would be the scenario? You go shor shava chamesh slaim, shor shava chamesh slaim. Let's say each of them was worth one. Okay. But let's say, ironically, after this ox was gored and it now is dead, okay, there's been a appreciation of the values. I'm trying to make it look less like a person, but I don't know if I'm succeeding. Anyway, let's say there's been appreciation of the values of dead oxen. Okay, the market's gone up, and even now that it's dead, it's worth 30. Okay, so if you split, okay, you've got 10 and 10 and 15 and 15. Okay, so if you split, mazik walks away with 25 a profit, but the nizak also walks away with 25, so he also gets a profit. Everybody wins. Okay, now obviously the nizak doesn't really win, because if his ox had been gored, it would have been worth even more. But at least he's not out money from prior to what happened, prior to the actual act of damage. So maybe in a case where the mazik walks away with a profit and the nizak doesn't even lose money, maybe at least in this case you should say let's split everything. Okay, so since the Torah anyway says Rabbi Yehuda, since I'm telling you that the Torah lets the mazik own part of the nevela, maybe the mazik would be entitled to own part of the nevela, even if it would mean he would walk away with a profit, meaning not just own the nevela to offset his loss if the value of the nevela goes up, but maybe he's so much as a part owner of the nevela that it can even offset his profit. Okay, so therefore it says, the Omer, the verse says, Shalem Yushalem, Baili Mishalmim Bein Baitlim Notlim. No, I'm sorry. His ownership of the nevela is enough to offset loss, but not enough to gain a profit. Okay, by the way, maybe a more reasonable scenario would be, let's say when the damage was done, originally the nevela went down to $10. Okay, and they each owned 5. But now the market's gone up, and over time, this $5 is now worth 15, right? So let's say that. Well, since you told me that the Torah says that the mazik gets half the nevela, and the mazik gets the increase in value of the nevela, maybe even if the nevela increases so much that lets the mazik walk away with a profit. Because you told me the mazik gets the appreciation of the nevela, so Rabbi Yehuda says, no, there's a limit. He gains the appreciation of the nevela to offset his payment, but he cannot gain so much that he can actually walk away with a profit out of this whole thing. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. Yes, the Torah goes easy on the mazik. It lets him own part of the nevela in order that he gains from the appreciation, but that's only if the appreciation offsets his payment. Not to the point that he would actually walk away with a profit.
Yes, two things. First, just put horns on the dead thing, and then we'll look at the person. I mean, in most cultures, people that have horns, it's not always the same.
It depends which religion you are.
Is the Torah's issue one of rachamim, or is it like a geneva? Like, in other words, I gored your ox, so I have my hand in it in a way.
Oh, you're sort of like you break it, you buy it,
exactly.
Type of a thing. That's an interesting perspective on it. Like you break it, you buy it, and you pay for the loss.
You do a shinui in something you've stolen. You've got a hand in it.
Yeah. I suppose, but that would be a principle that you would pay for the entire, as if the thing was worth zero, and then you should take full ownership. But I hear your logic. It's like if you're splitting everything.
I guess I'm asking: is that at play here, or is this a matter of a puzzle?
No, you're right. That's a good point. It's a good way of thinking about it, because it is true that maybe the splitting is sort of saying like it's like. It's interesting. It gets to the general question, though, that by case of a muad, then you should say you pay the full value when you fully own the carcass. But we don't say that, right? It only works halfway. You only gain. That's what the Gemara's point is. According to this, you're only gaining if the carcass goes up, not if the carcass goes down. All right. So, but I hear the point. All right. So the Gemara says like this:
if the carcass goes up, then the one who was damaged might have an increased profit from it, because rather than getting half, he's getting more than half.
No, if it goes, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it goes up, normally the one who is damaged would get all the profit. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, the mazik, if it goes easy on the mazik, lets the mazik gain half of the appreciation, but not to the point that it can walk away with the profit. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. So he says like this. He says, 1 minute. According to this, that 1 minute. Wait, let me just check Rashi. Hold on. Right. So Rashi says, let's say, he says, look, if Rabbi Yehuda is going to be such a little reading of the pasuk, let's take the following scenario. Let's say there was a case of 50 that Gordon Ox worth 40. Okay. Let me just pick 1 minute. Okay. And then it went down to 20. Okay. So what would we say in this case? Right. We would say in this case, okay, split this 25, 25, split this 10, 10. And everybody walks away with 35, right? Okay. Everybody walks away with 35. So in this case, the mazik doesn't walk away with a profit. He only walks away with 35. The nizak doesn't walk away with more than his ox was worth. He also only walks away with 35, right? Everybody with me here? Yes? You see that? Everybody walks away with 35 in this case. But there's a problem, because even though he doesn't walk away with a profit and he doesn't walk away with a profit, the mazik is paying more than half. He's paying 35, right? You with me here? So the problem is the Gemara before ruled out for Rabbi Yehuda the scenario of like 120. That would be impossible. Then the nizak would walk away with a profit, right? It ruled out a scenario of the reverse, of 20 and 100. That would be impossible. That way the mazik would walk away. That way the mazik would walk away with a profit. But Rava says that you can get a middle case where there's a gap, not a huge gap, and nobody walks away with a profit. But if you read the psukim literally, okay, split and split, the nizak walks away with more than half. How should that be that the nizak should walk away with more than half? Okay, that's his question. So you just split it, which presumably means like you're never going to pay more than half. I mean, Rabbi Yehuda's whole emphasis had been to go easier on the mazik, but he's also a more literal reader of the psukim. So we've excluded extreme cases where the mazik has a profit or the nizak has a profit. But if you have a middle case like 50 and 40, you'll have paying more than half. How is that possible? So the Gemara says no. Islay Rabbi Yehuda pchas shepichsa misa machzin b'chai. Rabbi Yehuda actually also agrees. In the end of the day, the mazik is only going to pay half of the depreciation of how much it went from being alive to being dead. Minale, where does he learn that from? That it says you split the dead animal, which to him means you split the depreciation due to death. But 1 minute. Rabbi Yehuda said you learn from that pasuk a more literal read. Each one gets half of the live one, half of the dead one. Not the fundamental idea that you only get half. You only pay half the depreciation. No. Then let it just say split the live, split the dead. My v'gam also split the dead. Shmami natarti. So the pasuk is telling you two things. Number one, it's telling you a literal idea. You split the live, you split the dead, for a case when they are both worth the same. In a case where they're both worth the same, right? If they were both worth the same, what would you have here? You'd have this, 35, it had gone down 30, you would have paid 15. If they're both worth the same, you do the math, and what winds up in a case where they're both worth the same, let's do an easier case, right? If you had 100 and 100, right? Then what would happen if they were both worth the same? If they were both worth the same, he'd walk away, each one would walk away with $60, right? Which would be meaning pay 40, which is half of the loss, right? Everybody see this? Goes down from 100 to 20, it's an $80 loss. If each one walks away with 60, so they split the loss. Each one lost $40. So Rabbi Yehuda holds in the pshat of the psukim tells you own half the nevela, so you gain in the appreciation of the nevela. That's what we've been saying. But it also, the psukim should only be read when both animals are worth the same. Because if the animals are worth different amounts, it's either going to lead to paying less than half or more than half, or walking away with a profit, or walking away, the one guy walking away with a profit, okay, or paying less or a different amount than half. So you have to read the psukim that they're worth the same. And the chiddush is that you get half of the nevela. But if they're worth different amounts, right, if this is whatever, I'm not going to do the math again, but if they're worth different amounts, then the payment will be different than a half. How does he know that the payment is a half? The pasuk, the gam et hamet yechetzun, tells you two things. Partly it tells you hamet yechetzun, that they split the nevela and you gain in the appreciation of the nevela. But the v'gam tells you that you basically pay for the half of the total depreciation. That he's not debating the basic principle that the amount that's going to be paid is half of the depreciation. Okay, so when the animals are worth different amounts, you figure out the depreciation due to death, and then the other guy gets half of the ownership of the cow based on that. All right, so there really are, at the end of the day, nobody can read the psukim literally in all scenarios. You read the psukim literally in all scenarios, you wind up paying widely different amounts, and you could get that the nizak walks away with a profit, the mazik walks away with a profit, you pay a different amount than half, it's crazy. Everybody reads it that you only basically pay half of the loss due to death, and that the nizak gets ownership of the cow or a lien on the cow based on half damages. Everybody agrees to that. The only bottom line difference is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the mazik gets a part ownership in the carcass, so that if it appreciates, that offsets the amount of payment that he has to make. All right, everybody pretty clear on that? More or less, as clear as you're going to get? Okay, it's as clear as mud. We're moving on.
Right. In the end, the nizak, though, keeps the literal carcass.
The nizak, well, it's not clear, according to Rabbi Yehuda, whether the mazik really owns half. It's funny that you could be a real owner, but it would only affect you if it moved in one direction rather than the other. So the way I would read it, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is that the nizak owns the carcass, but if the carcass increases in value, it offsets the payment that the mazik has to make. Right? Because the Gemara also says if it goes up, you wouldn't get a profit out of it going up, it would just offset your payment. Okay, so at the end of the day, the psukim are talking about the animals are worth the same amount. Everybody agrees that you pay half damages, and the whole debate is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the carcass goes up in value, it offsets the payment that the mazik makes. All right, let's move on. Okay, yesh chayev. Now we get to a different topic. I mean, we're still with shore, but a little bit different nature. Yesh chayev al masa sharo, who patra al masa atzmo. Patra al masa sharo, v'chayev al masa atzmo. You have some type of an axe that if your ox did it, you pay, but if you did it, you'd be exempt. Or the reverse. If you did it, you'd pay, but if your ox did it, you'd be exempt. Ketzad, what's the case? Shura shabiesh, if your ox embarrasses somebody, putter, then you're exempt because you only pay for boshet the same way you only pay for tsar and ripoy and shevet, all those additional payments for personal injury. Those are only by case when a human being inflicts personal injury, not when their animal inflicts injury. If my animal gores somebody, I don't pay hospital bills, I don't pay pain and suffering, I only pay damages. So similarly, for embarrassment, if my ox embarrasses somebody, you don't pay. But if you embarrass somebody, then you do pay. Here's another case. The ox gores out the eye or the tooth of a slave. Patur, you're exempt, because when the Torah says if you knock out the eye or tooth of your slave goes free, that's only when you personally do it, not when your animal does it. You're obligated, or meaning then the slave goes free. So that's cases where your ox is exempt and you are chayav.
Why are you doing the second case first?
I have no idea.
First case.
Shorosh because that's knas. Shorosh chaval the aviv ibimo chayav. Oh, you mean why? I know it's an ABBA. It's a chiastic structure. Shorosh chaval the aviv ibimo chayav. If your ox gores your father or mother, then you would pay your father or mother for the damages. But if you do physical injury to your father or mother, and chavala means it's a type of a wound, so in that case, patur, you're exempt because you're chayav misa. Because if a person wounds a parent, then that's a punishment deserving of death. So there will be no payment. So that's the case where your ox is liable and you're exempt. Similarly, if your ox takes a torch and lights a pile of a grain on Shabbos, you're chayav, okay? That would be, whether it be tzroros or whatever it would be. We had that whole case with the dog and the fire, but there would be some payment. But if you did it, you'd be exempt because you were machal Shabbos. So we say kimle. We'll talk about that in the Gemara. In those last two cases, the reason you're exempt is because you've done a sin deserving of death, and therefore that overrides any payment you might make. So let's take a look at this idea. Kimle. There's like a whole parak in Ksuvas that focuses on Kimle. Here we have it for one little passage of the Gemara. Tani Rabbi Yavo kamed Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yavo taught in the presence of Rabbi Yochanan. Kol kalkulim pturim chutz michov elamavir. All times you do a malach on Shabbos, but the effect of the malach is to be destructive. Okay, let's say one malacha is is erasing. But let's say you had let's say you basically had a Shakespeare manuscript and you erased it. That would be an example of makalkel. Okay, so let's say, so if you do a malach on Shabbos, but ultimately it's destructive, you are exempt, with the exception of wounding and making a fire. Okay, now, because the Gemara learns it out from Sukkim in a different Gemara, you could also understand that those acts are acts that sort of, the paradigmatic version of those acts often have a very destructive component. Right? Now, one version of wounding is shechting an animal, because you're wounding it, but ultimately you're turning it into meat. Making a fire can be very productive. You could be creating heat or, cooking something. But there's also something fundamentally destructive about those acts. And therefore, he says that those acts, even if they were fully destructive, that's still a malach on Shabbos and you're chayav. So this is what Rabbi Yavo taught him from Rabbi Yochanan, a Breita. Amalei, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Puktani livra, go teach that outside. Like he rejected that Breita. That's not a correct Breita. Whatever. Forget it. Don't teach that. Don't teach it in the base midrash. It's not a Mishnah. This teaching that you're chayiv for makalkel by those things is false. You're always patur for everything, even makalkel, even for those. Mishnah, and if you say that it is a legitimate teaching, a legitimate Breita, it's only in the following case. Not when you're a total makalkel. There needs to be an element of tikkun. If you are wounding because you want some type of a thing, a person, an animal, and you want to get the blood out, but the reason you want to get the blood out is because you want to give your dog some blood. Okay, or you're burning down, a nice, beautiful table, but you want to use the ashes. Okay, so meaning in the macro, it's destructive. You ruined a nice $1,000 table, but it's not totally destructive. You had some constructive purpose from it. You wanted to use those ashes to do something with those ashes. Okay, you destroyed. You wounded your cow and made $100 worth of damage, but you got some blood out of it to feed to your dog. Okay, so basically, I will concede that maybe you're chayav for mekalkel, but you need an element of tikkun. If it's fully mekalkel, you would be exempt. All right, so that's the debate. Now, let's take a look at our Mishnah. Shor shehidlik as a gedish for Shabbat, an ox lights a pile of grain. Chayav, you're liable. But who shehidlik as a gedish for Shabbat patur? But if a person did it, you're exempt because it's a chil of Shabbos. Viktani, who do you medisharo? It sounds like the act the person did is in a similar scenario as the act that the ox did. So the same way when an ox lights a gedish, lights a barrel of grain, it's not interested in the ashes, right? It's only doing it as a purely destructive act. Either as a mindless act or as a destructive act. But it's certainly not doing it because it wants to benefit from the ashes. So when you do it, presumably you're not interested in the ashes. It's a purely destructive act, and nevertheless, you see it's considered chilul Shabbos. So you see that making a fire, even if it's purely destructive, is considered chilul Shabbos. That's the case by the ox. Presumably, that's the case by you. The Ketani Pater, you're examining Neshu Nido Menavsho. So because you're liable for a capital crime. So you see that you're liable. It's chilul Shabbos even if you don't need the ashes. So the Gemara says, "Lo, no, not necessarily. Sure, dum yedidei. No, we'll actually say the opposite. That the ox is like the case of you. We don't presume the ox isn't intentional or isn't trying to get benefit. We'll assume that a human being doesn't act because he wants to get benefit, and that's the same as the case of the ox. So ma'hu de kabayle, the same way if you burned down this pile of grain, presumably you had some benefit to gain from it. You wanted to use the ashes. So when the ox did it, we would also be talking about a case that the ox wanted to get some benefit. What benefit would the ox want to get? So, what would be the case? What are we talking about? But sure, a very smart ox. It got a bite on its back. Okay, the Kabbalim Kalye, it wants to burn down this pile of grain, the Ingda Bekitma, and roll itself in the ashes. You ever see, like, the elephants that they go in the mud in order to deal with, like, the bites, the heat, well, also the bites, right? Isn't it insect bites? Yeah. Maybe it's to get the insects off them. I don't know. Anyway, so this ox wants to roll around in ashes, and it's very smart, and it realizes how to make ashes. You take a fire, you light a pile of grain. Okay, so that's why. But we're talking that yes, you wanted the ashes, and that's why it's chilul Shabbos, and there could be a case of an ox just like that. So the Gemara says, how would you know that would be the reality of why the ox burnt it down? Because after it burnt down this pile of grain, we see it rolling around in the ashes. So you can figure out its intention. Okay. So the Gemara says, fine. Really? Does anything like that ever happen? Is there an animal that smart that knows how to do that? And yes, there was an ox in the house of Rav Papa, that its gums were bothering it. Okay, it uncovered a barrel of mead or some type of a drink, and the shasi shichron, it drank the beer, drank the mead, the itzi, and that helped its gums. So you have sometimes very smart animals. Okay, anyway, even though the simple sense of our Mishnah is you're burning it down to be totally destructive, and that's considered chilul Shabbos, the Gemara says, no, it could be a case that you're burning it down for the purpose of the ashes. It's not totally destructive, and only when you're doing it to serve some purpose would it be considered chilul Shabbos.
These chachamim by this time must have been totally urbanized. In other words, a farmer, you would think would the discussion would be like, this is what animals always do, or this is what animals don't do.
I don't know what to tell you. Maybe. Okay. I'm a Rabban coming to Rav Papa. Now the rabbi said to Rav Papa, how can you say Shoro Dum Yadidei, that we're talking that the ox is like you, that and therefore they both, the same way you wanted to get the ashes, that's what we would say the scenario is, the ox wanted to get the ashes. But let's look at the other part of the Mishnah. Shoro Dum Yadidei. V'haktani, the first part of the Mishnah said, Shoro Shabiyesh Patur, if an ox caused embarrassment, you're exempt. Who Shabiyesh Chayav, if you cause embarrassment, you're liable. Now, if we say that the scenario is the same, similar type of intention is being referred to in the Mishnah, so how could that be by the case of embarrassment? You're only liable for paying for embarrassment if you intentionally are trying to cause embarrassment. So what would be a case that an ox wants to do something to embarrass the person that it's goring? Right, so clearly we're not talking about that the animal has the same intentionality as the person being described. So the Gemara says, no, actually, you can have it. You go to Niskavin Lahazik. It's true, you don't have an ox trying to embarrass somebody, but you do have an ox trying to inflict damage, and that's sufficient intention for a human being to be chayiv on embarrassment. The Amar Mar. That you are liable for paying boshet if you intentionally inflicted damage, even if you weren't trying to bring about embarrassment. So we actually can have that. Actually is easier than the ashes case. Okay, you and the ox are both trying to inflict damage, If you did it, you pay for boshet, because intention to inflict damage is enough intention to pay for boshet. But if your ox tried to inflict damage, it does not pay for boshet. That actually is an easy case. And yes, the Mishnah can be talking about the same intention that the ox has and that the human has. Okay. Rava Amar, so anyway, we've now explained that it could be by Shabbos you need to have intention to create the ashes, some type of intention to do something constructive, and that would be the scenario we're talking about. And that's why you would be Kimle. Rava Amar Masnisin B'Shogeg. Our Mishnah is not talking about intentional. Our Mishnah is talking about unintentional, or Shogeg meaning like that you are not willingly violating Shabbat. Now, it's important to know that a classic case of shogeg on Shabbat is either you forgot that it was Shabbat or you did not know that it was forbidden. But you were not a willful violator. And this gets Michael left, but this gets to the question Michael asked. Do you say Kimle even if somebody did an Avera without being intentional about it, without being willful about it? Okay, the Tana, like we talked in Bryce, the Beit Chizkiah, like the Beit Chizkiah teaches, famous teaching of Beit Chizkiah about the parameters of Kimle. The Tana, the Beit Chizkiah taught, Makeh Adam u'Makeh Behema. It says, Makeh Adam yumat, it says, Makeh Behema yishalmena, u'Makeh Adam yumat. If you smite an animal, you pay for it, and if you kill a human being, you're put to death. So, Makeh Behema lo chalakta, the same way, if you smite an animal, you pay for it. Now remember, Adam muad la'olam. So if a human being kills an animal, he pays for it, regardless of circumstances. Lo chalakta, you don't make distinctions about bein shogeg u'bein mezid, whether it was willful or not willful, unintentional or willful, bein mitkaven l'she'ein mitkaven, intentional or not intentional, bein derech yimida l'derech aliyah, whether he was on a downward movement or an upward movement. That's based on like gullus, because when you're gullus, the sort of chopping of the wood and the top of the axe flying off, the Gemara understands that it's only when you're moving your axe downward and the top of it flies off, you get gullus. But if you're moving your axe upward and it flies off, you don't. So those are distinctions that matter in cases for gullus. These issues of shogeg and mezid, these might matter in cases of whether you have done an act of murder, an act of chayav gullus. But when it comes to killing an animal and paying, none of this matters. Adam muad la'olam, you pay under all circumstances. In all those cases when you've killed an animal, l'potra mama, we make no distinctions in any of those scenarios to exempt you. L'chayva mama, we say in all those cases you pay for killing an animal. So the same way that's true, that you always pay regardless by killing an animal, af makeh adam, so it's makeh behema yishamena, when you kill an animal, you pay for it regardless of circumstances, and makeh adam yumat, when you kill a human being, you're put to death. Now you're put to death regardless of circumstances. You need to obviously be intentional. It has to be an act of murder. But we're reading it when you kill a human being, you never pay for damages. Okay, the only thing that can be done to you is put to death. There will be never any payment for damages when you kill a human, regardless of circumstances. Okay, af makadam lo tachlot, don't make any distinctions. Bo bein shogeg lemezi bein miskaven l'shein miskaven, whether it was unintentional or intentional, willful, not willful, bein derech yimid derech aliyah, going up, going down. Don't make any of those distinctions. Chayv mama to say, oh, in this case, we're going to make you pay money. No. When the life is taken or any capital crime is committed, is how we're going to read it, like Chilul Shabbos, you're always going to be exempt. So the principle of Kimle, and this is very important, because there are two ideas about Kimle, right? One idea of Kimle is basically that it's learned from the pasuk of Kidei Rishato, right? Because based on your wickedness, you are punished. And the Gemara says, Risha achas atamachayvo, you make somebody pay for one wicked act, not for two wicked acts, which basically means that if Beis Din is inflicting a punishment, they're only going to inflict one punishment, not multiple punishments, okay? That's the type of a thing we say, that if, for example, you do an act that's deserving of lashes and deserving of payment, that you're only going to get the lashes, you're not going to pay. And that's only when Beis Din actually inflicts the punishment. Okay, that's a type of a kimle, where it's because we're inflicting one punishment, we're not going to impose another one. And we have to actively impose the punishment. That would be a case of like malchus and mammon, lashes and money. But when it comes to a case of a capital crime, that's a kimle of a different category. Even if we're not going to impose any punishment, this person did it accidentally, b'shogeg, eino mitkave, all these things that there would be no basis. He was mechal Shabbos, but it was a complete accident. It doesn't matter. the weight of the act, that it was a capital crime, even though it was not a scenario where Beis Din could ever punish the person, the weight of the act of a capital crime erases any monetary payment that could be made. Okay? So that clear, meaning it's a very different idea of kimle. One idea is we're not going to impose two punishments. What Chizkiah is saying is, when it comes to an act that's a capital crime, it has nothing to do with whether we're imposing the punishment or not. The fact that you've done a capital crime is so weighty that there will never be any payment of money. Okay? So in those cases, we will never say, l'chayva mammon ela potra mammon. Okay, so therefore, if somebody is machal Shabbos, even b'shogeg, they're not going to pay the monetary payment. So Amalei Rabban LeRava, so the rabbi said to Rava, Mimatzis mukum so b'shogeg. How can you say our Mishnah says that you're exempt from payment even if you did it b'shogeg? You burnt down this wheat stack. The Mishnah says you're liable the death penalty. And you said if it's shogeg, you're not liable the death penalty. So Rabbi says no. Here's what the Mishnah means. Since were you to do it intentionally, you'd be deserving of the death penalty. And the Echidami, what would be that scenario? The Kabayla Ifaro, that you want the ashes. Remember, this is getting back to that issue. Since there are cases of burning down the wheat stack, that you're chayav misa, that you would get the death penalty, which is what? You did it intentionally, and you did it for the sake of the ashes. So since there are some scenarios of burning that down, that you would actually get the death penalty, even though that's not true in this scenario was unintentional, nevertheless, it's enough of an act of chilul Shabbos that you do not pay. So nido menafsha does not mean right now you're deserving the death penalty. It means the nature of the act is one that it could bring about the death penalty under other circumstances. And therefore, that is enough to exempt you. So we have a very important principle that we say kimle, when it's something that is liable to death penalty, it's a capital crime, even if we're not imposing it, even if it's b'shogeg. Okay, that's a very important principle about kimle. Now, how did this address the question we asked about Shabbos, about tzarich la'efaro? What's the still scenario? How do you address the case in the Mishnah? Is the guy understood to be burning down the wheat stack for the sake of the ashes? So Rashi says, no. Once the Gemara is saying intent doesn't matter, you say kimle regardless of intent. That would be true even if your intent was to not for the sake of the ashes. Right? That seems to be the point of Rava's answer, right? Rava's answer seems to be, look, you don't need intent to say kimle. Even b'shogeg, you would say kimle. Remember, what was the Gemara's question? The Gemara's question was, where is the guy doing it for the sake of the ashes in the Mishnah? And Rava's answer seems to be, well, you don't need intent because we're talking about, you say kimle even b'shogeg. Everybody with me? Yes? Okay, Tosfos' answer says is 1 minute. There's a huge difference. If I in one case, I am not willingly violating Shabbat. I think that it is Sunday, or I don't think it's usher to do this on Shabbat. But the act that I'm doing is an act of chilul Shabbos. I am burning down the wheat stack for the sake of the ashes. That's defined as an act of chilul Shabbos. So then you could tell me it doesn't matter if I'm willingly breaking Shabbos or not. You say kimle. But if I am burning down the wheat stack for purely destructive motives, not for the sake of the ashes, then that's not an act of chilul Shabbos at all, right? So he says, what does Rava's answer mean? Wonderful. Rava said we're talking even b'shogeg, but the saying even b'shogeg means you're not a willful violator. But wouldn't you still need the intent to define it as an act of chilul Shabbos? If you're missing that intent, right, then presumably, just because physically the act could be chilul Shabbos, but isn't intent constituent of defining it as an act of chilul Shabbos? Not intent to violate, intent to want something constructive out of the act, intent to want the ashes out of the act. Okay, so Tosfos says actually you still do need that intent, and according to Rava, all Rava is saying is that you don't need to be a willful violator, but Rava is not disagreeing with the fact that you would still need intent to do something constructive. So that raises an interesting question of what is the extent of Chizkiah's teaching. Chizkiah says you don't need to actually be deserving of the death penalty. You just need to have done the act. Okay, even if you did not willfully do it and you're not deserving of the death penalty. What if I didn't have the intent that normally is defined as part of what makes the act the sin? Right? Would you still say kimle in that case? So Rashi says, yeah, because physically it's an act of Chilul Shabbos. With the right intent, it would have been an act of Chilul Shabbos. And Tosfos says, no, in that case, it's just not Chilul Shabbos. But here, intent, it defines the nature of the act. Yes, no.
Yeah, a couple of things, short things. One is, exactly like you're saying. That would mean, according to Tosfot, for example, all the people out there who are oblivious of Shabbos in all ways.
No, oblivious still means they were not willfully violating. But in terms of how they defined what type of an act they did, right? That's Tosfos' point. Chizkiah will tell you don't need any awareness that is relevant for, let's say, culpability. Any awareness that is relevant for what it means to be a willing violator. Okay, but you still need the intent that is necessary to define the nature of the act. Okay, I'll give you another extreme case. Let's say you had a case about midaseit. Right? Let's say you had a case
that you're pulling up grass.
That I was or that I was completely unaware that, I was like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a case. I was just gesticulating, and my hand turned on a light switch or something like that, and the light switch is also connected to, and then it started a fire, whatever. As I was gesticulating, my hand knocked down a torch that started a fire that burned something. What would you say? Oh, Kimle, because I also was Machal Shabbos. Or would you say, no, that's not a case of not willingly violating? It's a completely, their intent, what the lack of intent means that I didn't even do the act, okay? So I think that's the question of how much, at what stage would you say the lack of intent means that you weren't even Machal Shabbos, not that you were Machal Peshogi.
Okay. Do you find it striking at all that the language of Kimle does not appear anywhere in the Sugya?
So that could be because of the point that I said, that the Kimle is more specifically, or you have to see, you're right, how that word is used, but more classic use of Kimle is when the punishment is imposed. Here, the fact that the Chilul Shabbos is so weighty that it outweighs, even if there's no punishment, it outweighs anything. It could be a principle that's broader than Kimle.
And correct. I just don't remember. Could you remind me, my ox gores somebody. I don't have to pay hospital bills. I don't have to pay workers'
No, you don't pay hospital. You don't pay workers. You just pay.
That's best. That's a drasha from a bus.
Yeah, we learned out that each hitain mun b'amito, each b'amito v'lo shor b'amito.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, John, you have nothing you have to question?
I think the distinction what Doe was talking about is the dark distinction between Mezid and Shogeg and Miskayv and Neo Miskayv.
Right. You mean, so what's the difference between Shogeg, Mezid, and Miskayv and Miskayv?
No, I'm saying there is a clear distinction.
Right.
And it's exactly what you're explaining.
Right. So now I do want to say, the last thing I'll say about this, and we'll do next Mishnah, is that Tosfos actually says, why did you need to say the difference between Shogeg, Mezid, Miskayv, and Miskayv? Tosfos actually says, and this is a point that Tosfos said a few times in this Masechet, that the difference of Shogeg and Mezid is the sort of classic case about I did an act at Chayav Misa and I did another act at the same time that would be a Tashlumim act. Like I burnt down the haystack while, which is both Chilul Shabbos and a Nezek. Or somebody, shot somebody and they killed the person and they also ruined the suit with the guy's blood. Okay, that would be a case of that one case. Miskayv and Ein Miskayv says also comes to exempt you from something else, which comes to exempt you from civil payment due to loss of life. Meaning that's a different concept. Somebody kills somebody unintentionally, okay? Forget Kimle, you don't have to pay for other types of liability. Maybe since in that case we can't, like the OJ case, if we can't prosecute the guy criminally, maybe at least we can make him pay civilly for loss of life, okay? And that's what it says is also what Chizkiah is saying, is there will never be any payment for some other liability that's incurred during that time, and there also will never be any payment due to loss of life either. Okay, you can never pay for loss of life. The only thing you can do for loss of life is get prosecuted for murder. You can't get prosecuted civilly. All right, so that's also what Tosfos says a little bit with those phrases. Let's take a look now at the next Mishnah. Shur Shaya Rodef. These are now fun. Like now that we've got, we did one case about parsing the case of the Torah, splitting the animal. Is it Yusham Hashur or Yuchlan Hashur? Now we did a little bit of Kimle. Now we're going to do a little bit of Hamotzi Mechaver Olav Haraya. Okay, so Shur Shaya Rodef Achar Shur Acher. One ox was running after another ox to gore it. And then the owners ran after it and found one ox on the ground, like totally, bleeding. So one guy says, "Your ox just gored my ox." The other one says, "Loki, no, it tripped over a rock. It wasn't my ox." So the one who comes to get paid, he has the burden of proof. Now the question is going to be, what constitutes sufficient burden of proof? You need two direct witnesses. Let's say the other ox had blood on its horns. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's say if this ox had clear horn holes in its body, right? At what stage is it considered a burden of proof? But the point is, certainly the point here is that circumstantial evidence, under many cases, maybe all cases, is not enough. You got to prove it. It's not enough that it looks like it. Okay. Now, Reuven and Shimon's oxen were running after one ox on Reuven, one ox on Shimon. They were both running after Levi's ox. Somehow it was clear that one of the oxen gored. Maybe a witness at a distance saw an ox gore, but didn't see which ox gored. So Reuven said to Shimon, "It was your ox." And Shimon said to Reuven, "No, it was your ox." They're both exempt because each one, Levi can't prove from either which one of them owes him money. They each say the other guy's ox did it. Okay, it's another version of a Motzei Mechaber Alav Raya. Now, let's say Reuven owned both oxen, okay? Then Shneim Chayavim. Then both oxen are chayav, which is a little funny way of saying it, but if Reuven owned both oxen and Shimon doesn't know which ox gored, nevertheless, he knows that one of Reuven's oxen gored, so at least he can collect money from Reuven. Now, it is a little bit of interesting because it was a short time, and we pass him like Rabbi Akiva. If we pass him that's just a debt with a lien on the ox, then you could say, I don't care which of your oxen did it. You owe me $50 or $100. But if it's a yuchlat hashur like Rabbi Akiva, I might know that I own one of your oxen, but I can't prove which ox I own. Because the fact that your ox gored means I become now an owner in your ox. So let's say I know that I owe one of your oxen, but I can't prove which one. But presumably there's some recourse there. Right? I know you have property of mine, even if I can't exactly prove which of those oxen are mine. I know one of them is, so I can still prove though that you all have property of mine. So presumably I can somehow get some satisfaction there. Yes.
Just structurally, if we're trying to teach the principle of Motzei Mechaber Alav Raya, the way it's structured here, it's Reuven and Shimon's oxen, and it gores Levi's ox.
Right.
Wouldn't the correct teaching be for Levi to say to Reuven, your ox gored you owe me money, and you say, it wasn't my ox, it was his ox.
Meaning, why say shorchai hizik rather than shoro hizik? Yeah, it's true.
Right.
But I understand. Why do they have Reuven and Shimon talking to one another? Reuven and Shimon should both be talking to Levi. Yeah, I do understand that. But yeah, it's true. It was a little bit more direct to frame it that way, but I was wondering the same thing. Okay. Now, both oxen are owned by Reuven, but one is a big ox and one's a small ox, and they're both Tom. So remember, if the small ox gored, the nizak is going to be out money. He's not going to get full satisfaction from the value of the small ox. Okay? Hanizak omer godol hizik. So the nizak says the big one gored, and I'm going to be able to get my at least full half payment out of the big one. But mazik omer loki elakato nizik. No, the small little one gored your animal, and therefore you'll take the small one, but you're not going to get your full payment, full half payment. So echad ta'ur, echad tam v'echad muad. Let's say one of Reuven's ox was a tam and one was a muad. Nizak omer muad hizik. Nizak says the muad gored, and therefore I'm going to get full payment. But mazik omer loki elatam hizik. No, the tam gored, and you're only going to get half payment. So Shimon has the burden of proof, okay, and he's not going to get full satisfaction. Now let's say there were two oxen that were damaged. One big and one small. There were two oxen that were involved in the goring. One big and one small. So Hanizak Omer, the one who suffered the damage, says, and they both damaged oxen belong to Shimon, and both damaging, goring oxen belong to Reuven. Hanizak Omer, and let's say presumably they were both Tom. So Shimon said, the big one gored the big one, so where I suffered the biggest loss, the goring of the big one, I'll be able to get paid at least get my full half payment because it came out of your big ox, okay? And the small one was gored by your small ox, so at least I'll get my full half payments out of this. The katan gets a katan. The mazik omer loki, nope, that's not what happened. Ella katan is a gadol, the small one gored your big ox, so you're not going to get your full big half payment from the big ox because you're only going to get it out of my small little one. The gadol is a katan, and the big one gored the small one, so you'll get your full half payment for the small one, but not for the big one. Or echatam v'echad muad. One of the gored ox was a tam and one was a muad. Hanizak omer muad hizik as a gadol. The muad gored the big one, so I'll get my full payment for the big loss. The tam is a katan, and the half payment I'll get, for the small loss. The tam gored the small one. V'mazik omer lo kino is the opposite. The tam is a gadol. The tam gored the big one, so that big payment you're only going to get half. The muad is a katan, and the muad gored the small one, so the full payment will only be for the small one. So the principle of all these is very good. Okay. Let's see the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Zot Omeret. This Mishnah tells you that says that that Sumchas's colleagues disagree with him. Because what does Sumchas say? The Amar Sumchas says whenever there's a doubt about who owes money, you split it. Now it doesn't mean whenever there's a doubt. Right? Let's say I go over to David and I say, David, that nice Maserati you have, that's mine. And you say, what are you talking about? I say, what's okay? I pass like Sumchas. I'll just take half of it. Okay, so it's not any time there's a doubt. There has to be some objective basis. There has to be some objective basis for doubt. This case, clearly, everybody's looking at it, sees something happened. One of these animals gored. You just don't know which one. So any normal observer would say there's an objective suffix here, whether it was the tam or the muad, the big or the small. So Sumchas would say, if that's true, the circumstances basically speak to the idea that there's a question what happened. We ignore the claims and the counterclaims, and we ignore Hamotza Mechavera, and we just say there's no way we're going to resolve this, split it. That's what Sumchas says. And this Mishnah teaches you don't split it. Even in the case of objective doubt, you say Hamotzi Mechaver Olav.
Isn't this the exact same Mishnah comes up the first Mishnah Baba Matzia?
Yeah. A lot of this is discussed elsewhere, but Matzia certainly. Okay. Amalei Rav Abba bar Mama, Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Amar Sumchas afilu bar yubari. Would Sumchas say you split it, even if both one is saying you definitely owe me money? No, I definitely don't owe you money. Meaning maybe when Sumchas says you split, it's when each of the litigants say, I don't know what happened. In that case, we'll say split it. But if the nizak is if the mazik, the one who you're trying to get the money from, is saying, I definitely do not owe you money, maybe in that case, Sumchas would respect the idea of the muhzak, and he would say, if he's making a claim that he definitely does not owe the money, maybe we don't say chokim, maybe we say So he said, would Sumchas say even by bari and bari that you would split it? I'm like, yes. Amar Sumchas afilu bari. Even if the guy is saying, I definitely don't owe you money, nevertheless, Sumchas says you split it. Umimai, the masnizim bari. Now, the fact that you asked it means that you understood, because we were saying our Mishnah is an anti-Sumchas Mishnah. So, and we're saying that shows that there's a debate even in the case of bari and bari. How do you know that our Mishnah is a case of bari and bari? To say that position shows a non-Sumchas position. We mind the masnisim bari. Who diktani ze omer shorchi hizik. This one says your ox. Ze omer low key. No, that's not. It's the opposite. Meaning it doesn't sound like they're saying maybe your ox. When he says no, rather it was the other one ox. It sounds like everybody is making a definite claim. Now, so rather than saying that Sumchas agrees in that case, we're saying that even though everybody's making a definite claim, Sumchas would say you split it. And the Mishnah is in a position that disagrees with Sumchas. Okay. Mazki la Rav Papa. So Rav Papa asked this. Midireisha bar yubari, seifanami bar yubari. Okay. If our Mishnah is talking that everybody is making a definite claim, that's the beginning. It's also the end. Let's look at the end case of the Mishnah. Ema seifa. Let's look at the end case. Haya echad gadol v'echad katan. One was big, one was small. Nizak omer gadol hizik, umazik omer lo ki ela katan hizik. The Nizak says the big one gored, and I'll get my full half payment from the big one. They're both tam. And the Mazik said no, only the small one gored. Echad tam v'echad muad. One was tam, one was muad. Nizak omer muad hizik, and muad did, and I'll get full damages. The Mazik omer lo ki ela tam hizik. No, you only get half damages. I'm not to make a bel of a raya. Fine, that's the Mishnah. Everybody's making a bari claim. So how am I saying? What's the implication of the Mishnah? The implication of the Mishnah is that if the Nizak cannot prove his bigger claim, so Shakal Kadamar Mazik, he would at least get what the Mazik claimed, right? The Nizak made a big claim, the Mazik made a small claim. It says the Nizak's got to prove his point. If the Nizak doesn't prove his point, presumably at least he's entitled to collect based on what the Mazik said, right? But 1 minute, Neimat Avi Tiyufta the Rabbi Bar Nassan. let's say that's a count on Rabbi Bar Nassan. The Amar ta'anochi tim v'hodelo b'seorim patur. Okay, I go and I say, David, you owe me a pound of wheat. You borrow, I gave you a pound of wheat to watch for me. And he says, no, you didn't. You only gave me a pound of barley. Okay, so we would say, I can't prove it. Now, do I say, well, at least give me the pound of barley? You at least admitted to a pound of barley? Okay, or do we say, no? The fact that I said a pound of wheat meant that I was implicitly saying, you don't owe me barley. You only owe me wheat. So even though you've admitted to barley, maybe you don't have to give it to me. I never asked for barley. I implicitly was saying you don't owe me barley. You only owe me wheat. So that's what we say. If I demand wheat and you concede barley, you don't have to pay me anything. Okay, now if that's true, because my claim of wheat was a bari claim. I didn't come and say, maybe you owe me wheat, maybe you owe me barley. I said you owe me wheat, which means only wheat. So if it's a bari claim, it excludes the other claim. So the Gemara is saying, say the same thing here, right? The Nizak says the big one damaged, okay, which is implicitly saying the small one did not damage. No, not the small one, only the big one. That's the one that damaged. So when you concede the small one, why do you have to pay anything? I've implicitly rejected your claim about the small one. If I'm making a bari claim, then I am saying the small one did not damage me, only the big one. Okay? Jonathan, you got to look at your face because
they're different.
Here's why it's different. If it's about muad or something of that nature, you're right. I say you owe me $200 and you say only $100. Okay, so $200 includes a demand of $100. But if we're talking about a tom, then maybe it's not different. I say I owe that animal. I own that animal gored, and I own half of that animal. And you say, no, the small animal gored, and you only own half of the other animal. So, but I agree. If it's about the circumstances, but ultimately it's a demand for cash, then it's not the same. But if it's about tom, it is more similar, right? So anyway, so the Gemara says, if you're going to tell me the Mishnah is bari and bari, why do I get to collect based on at least what you conceded? I made a bari claim that rejected what you were conceding. So it should be like, I asked for wheat, you said barley, I don't get anything. So, okay, so that's the Gemara's question. So what we will do is we will end here, and we will pick up tomorrow with trying to figure out whether our mission is talking about bari and bari or bari and shema.
If I say Se'orim,